So now we're going to introduce some declarative navigation. So what this is going to enable us to do is click on our particular items, but also click to go through to our form to create a new item. So we'll start with the easy one and go into our donut list component. And we're going to create a button up the top. Now the button's going to be there whether our donut card or no donuts are available, because we can create a new product at any time. So let's go and create an A tag. Now what we might used to be doing is something like ahref and then something like /admin/new. Now in Angular we have a different approach. If we are already on our admin route, which we are, we don't want to use this href. So what we want to do is essentially provide a button called new donut. And we're going to set this up with a quick class of button, dash, and then green. Now I've also created an icon. So we're going to use image source equals, and then this is inside our assets, image icon, and then plus.svg, just to make our application a bit more realistic. Now, if we were to save this out, we can jump into our application. You can see that we have /new, which technically does work, but it's not going to make our router aware of our links. So at this point, we want to introduce this concept of a router link. The router link is an attribute that we can then bind to and specify the URL. Now you could see that there were two flavors. We have the normal attribute and we also have the property that we can bind to. And our IntelliSense says property here and also attribute up here. So if we want to pass in a string such as new to create a new donut, this completely makes sense. We don't need to have a dynamic name for this. So now if we hit save, this is then going to work in a relative URL. However, you can see in the bottom it has donuts/new, but when we click on this, nothing is actually happening because we do not have a root definition. So what we essentially need to do is provide a root definition for our router link to be able to take effect. So let's jump to our admin module, and instead of rendering the donut, we're then going to do donut/new. Now to keep things relative, I'm also going to change this to donuts, so we're going to keep things plural. So it uses the same base URL, which means that we can then use our /new. So we'll save this out. We can go to our button, click it, and we are then now taken, and you can see how quickly that happened, through to our new single component. We can go back by using the browser, we can go back again, and Angular is then quickly rendering with JavaScript our new single component for us to then go and create a particular product. So that's one way that we can create our router links. What I'm going to do is add some quick styling to this so we can push our button down. So here we're going to say div class equals donut list, and we're going to call these the actions. It might be that in the future we're going to have a few more buttons up here. So rather than call it something very precise like donut list new, we're going to call it the actions, and we can always change this in future if we need to. So let's take our dash actions, and all we're going to do is apply some styles to it. We can then create some backticks. We can then say donut dash list, and then inside we can extend it by ampersand dash actions margin dash bottom is then going to have a value of 10 pixels. We'll save this out. This then nicely reformats for us, and we get some nice breathing space around the button. We can then go through and come back. So the next piece we really want to do is to navigate through to these components because each of them has an ID, remember. So we're going to use that ID that when we click on them, we'll then put that ID in the URL. So what we're going to have is /donuts/new, or if we're not creating a new one, we're going to have the ID instead of that new value. So what we need to do on our list is actually modify our donut card to not be just a div. We want to actually supply an A tag. So if we jump up to our div, what we can do is change this over to an A tag, which means that we are then going to supply a router link. Now, because we want to bind the ID, we're going to need to bind to our router link property. Now, before we do that, don't forget to change over your div at the end to the A tag as well. So what we essentially need to bind to, because we have donut.promo, donut.icon.name, we have that ID available to us in the card because it's coming through as an input. So let's jump up inside our router link. We can leave things relative and we can just simply say donut.id. If we go back in our application, we can then hover, and hope you can see at the bottom, we then have the IDs of each individual item as we then hover over them. If we then click, nothing happens because our wildcard selector is then taking us back here again. So what we essentially need to do is set up the capability to handle these dynamic paths. We're not going to do that in this lesson because we've now taken the time to set up a small lesson on router links. We have our list where we've created a static router link using an attribute with a string value. And we've also looked at creating a property binding to the router link directive and then passed in that particular donor ID. Now these router link directives, I should also mention, come from Angular's router module. So when we go and declare this inside our admin module and import it, for example, this then gives us the package of directives that we can then go and use and start to sprinkle around our application. So with this in mind, we now need to set up the capability in our admin module to handle those routes that when we click on each individual item. And what's going to happen here is we're going to then learn how to fetch the data and load the item that we then clicked, and we'll almost come full circle at this point.